along to see where we are. You guys clear? Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You guys clear? Oh, yeah. All right, now, question in the audience? No. Okay. Well, welcome, everybody. We're going to begin this forum, and it's all going to be for television, so I'll be looking at this camera instead of all of you. But it'll look right when you watch it on Channel 3 later. We're 25 seconds away from beginning.
I have some competition here. Can I give my first question?
Welcome to the 26th Middlesex State Representative Primary Forum. I'm Nina Arima, and your moderator for the evening. This is part one of two forums co-sponsored by the Cambridge Democratic City Committee and Continental Cablevision as a public service. We wish to thank the Institute of Politics here at Harvard University for providing the space. Regardless of which candidate you may prefer, please remember to vote. This evening's program consists of distinguished panelists from the local media and the candidates for state representative. The panelists are Steve Marks, Director of Television Production and Programming at Continental Cablevision in Cambridge, Howard Manley, Cambridge reporter for the Boston Globe, Amy Miller, Senior Writer for the Cambridge Chronicle, and J.K. Deneen, reporter for the Cambridge Tab. The format for this evening is round robin. We will begin with candidates' opening statements, then questions from the panelists, and finally closing statements from the candidates. The first candidate to speak will become the second candidate to answer questions in the next round, and then become the third candidate in the subsequent rounds, and so on, until we are out of time. Time will be kept assiduously by our timekeeper, and a bell will ring when 10 seconds remain during an answer session, and then rung again when your time is up. I will have to interrupt if a candidate goes beyond time. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the candidates and their opening statements. We'll begin with Michael Cavallo.
Good evening. The Massachusetts legislature has a record that is all right in some areas, but I believe the legislature would greatly benefit from some diversity and background. Most legislators enter the State House as longtime politicians or young, ambitious lawyers. Very few are doctors, business persons, or others of the myriads of other possible appropriate backgrounds. As someone who has neither run for office before nor gone to law school, I'm not one of the usual suspects who runs for this kind of post. But I'm involved in a lot of activities that have prepared me for the state rep job. I have 15 years of business experience, both running parts of large companies as well as my own small company. This background will help me to understand the practical and financial aspects of legislation better than people with a purely legal or political orientation. Also, with my business profits, I set up a foundation which aids people who risk their jobs and livelihood to help society in areas such as public health, the environment, civil rights, and honesty in government. By helping many courageous people each year, I've learned about and made a difference in many public policy areas, from halting the spread of chemical warfare to safer food supply to nuclear safety to fighting David Duke in Louisiana. I also hold a statewide office. I'm a commissioner of the Massachusetts Disabled Persons Protection Commission. Now, I've taken a leave of absence for this campaign, and if I win, I'll step down from that post so that I can devote full time to the state rep job. The Massachusetts Disabled Persons Protection Commission protects adults with disabilities from abuse, primarily people with mental retardation, both in state institutions and community settings. So get some new blood into the political process and vote for Mike Cavallo for state rep.
Thank you, Michael. And now the Honorable Alice Wolf.
Thank you. I want to thank the audience for being here and the audience at home. In this race, you have a very clear choice. When I've been out going door to door talking with people, they say, well, except for all your experience, what's the difference between you and your opponents? And I tell them, well, that experience is really a very important part of who should be your state representative. We are filling a seat of a very important leader in our community. And not only that, but the federal government is bringing to the state many very, very important issues. Issues such as health care, education, job training, welfare. And so what we need, and I think what you need at the State House, is representation that has had experience with that wide range of issues. I've been your mayor, I've been your city councilor, I've been your school committee member, and even more than that, I worked before I was in office and since I was in office with all of you in the community to solve problems and deal with issues. And that's been in the areas, again, of health care and education and all of the things that are really important to you. I've done that as well with city and state officials around the country and in this state to deal with those issues. So that's why I want to bring that experience to you for the future, to work on those issues which are now relevant. And you can count on my record to do that. I need your support and vote on September 17th.
Thank you, Alice. And now the Honorable Anthony Galluccio.
Thank you, Nina. I'm proud and honored to be here, and it's an honor for me especially to be here at the Kennedy School because my family got their start in politics back when my father met John F. Kennedy at Harvard University back in the 30s and went on after serving in World War II to be asked to serve as his campaign secretary in 1946 and 1952, and went on and did that and successfully beat Henry Cabot Lodge, who was a Republican candidate at the time, in 52, and we're very proud of that. So I'm honored to be here. I also want to introduce myself. My name is Anthony Galluccio. I'm a second-term city councilor in Cambridge. I am a graduate of Suffolk University Law School. While I attended Suffolk University Law School, I worked for a Democratic state senator on Beacon Hill for 4 years. I attended the evening program, and I'm very proud of both my experience at the City Council and in the State Senate. And I want to point out that I am the only candidate in the race with both local and state experience. And I think that's very important. I was born in Cambridge and brought up by my family. My father died when I was 11, and my mother raised us. It's important for me to point out that my mother is my role model, as she raised myself and my two sisters and successfully brought us through the Cambridge school system and through college. And I think more than anything else, what I want people to remember about me, when they see how hard I pursue changes in health care to expand health care coverage and expand housing opportunities and try to create job growth for working people and to improve women's rights, and to understand how deeply committed I am to young people and working families, is to understand where I came from and why I feel that way. Because I think it's so important for people when they see me and to understand how compassionate I am, to know where I come from and why I feel that way.
Thank you, Anthony. And now we'll go to the first question from Steve Marks. He'll direct it to Alice Wolf, and she'll have 1.5 minutes to respond.
Alice, as a state representative, what powers would you use, and how would you use them either to restrict or to encourage economic development? And I'd like, if you can, to address this particularly with regard to the Alewife area.
Well, there's probably, there are a number of important issues in this race. And certainly economic development of jobs is one of the key issues that people have been talking with me about as I've gone around the district. I think that the kinds of things that the state can do as opposed to the local community is really to help companies working in emerging industries so that they can really create jobs here at places like Alewife. We can help companies to work in areas of being able to do exporting and other things to be able to grow their businesses. What we need to do is to work to train and educate our workforce, as I did in developing the workforce development plan when I was on the city council and bringing that to the state level. Those are the kinds of actions that will bring economic development to Alewife, and it will bring economic development to Alewife as we need, that will serve the neighboring community, not just the suburbs.
Thank you. And now, Anthony Galluccio.
Thank you, Steve. That's an excellent question, and I'd like to point out one thing. My track record at the City Council as Chairman of Economic Development has been one where I've reconciled with the idea that elected officials have to work with the business community. And it's very tempting at times, and I think I can be as anti-corporate America as anyone. But there is times, for the sake of working people who need jobs and need services like food stores, for elected officials to sit down with the business community, ensure that responsible development includes job guarantees for local people and guarantees that the services provided are those services which people needed. We've had instances in the city where that has not happened. We watched a food store leave Cambridge down in Cambridgeport, which was a terrible thing for working people who needed food. The Alewife situation is a little different, and as much as I think I'm the Labor candidate in this race, as I've been endorsed by the AFL-CIO and countless other labor organizations, that neighborhood has a bigger problem right now, which is the environmental issues which surround that site. And I don't think we can discuss what type of development goes there until we resolve the environmental issues. At that time, we need to get everyone in the neighborhood involved, including the people who live in Ringe Towers, in Walden Square and Jefferson Park. And I think at that time we can discuss what the neighborhood needs and tie that to jobs for our residents who desperately need it in that neighborhood.
Thank you, Anthony. And now Michael Cavallo.
I think the Alewife question very much has to do with this trade-off that Anthony was talking about between economic development and the environment. And there's no perfect solution to this. You want, on the one hand, to create more jobs for people and more useful services. On the other hand, you want to have a livable space to be in. And so I think what you want is sort of a middle course in something in regard to Alewife, where government sort of guides the process to having some development, but not sort of blind development, not overreaching development. In terms of a more favorable business environment for Cambridge, I think on the state level, what you want to do is you want to have a fair tax system where businesses have an incentive to stay in this area, but you're not getting into these bidding war situations with the Fidelity-type bills and the Raytheon-type bills, or on an industry-by-industry basis or a company-by-company basis, you suddenly make special deals. I think we really want to avoid that kind of mistake in taxation policy, and I think that has far-reaching effects on both the employment and the business situation.
Thank you. And now the second question from Howard Manley, and you will direct it to Anthony Galluccio, and you will have a minute and a half to respond.
Mr. Galluccio, Massachusetts has one of the toughest welfare reform acts in the nation. What will you tell welfare recipients in Cambridge who are willing to work but unable to find jobs?
Thank you, Howard. That's an excellent question. And about a week ago, when I was door knocking in one of the public housing developments in Cambridge, I got into a discussion with 4 welfare women. And I think one of the most distorted images in this country right now is of welfare recipients. And I think what we have to remind ourselves is why welfare started, as a tool to ensure that young people and infants were not injured by societal problems. And people have to realize that there are many, many welfare recipients out there that want to work. And unless we have radical reform, and what happened at the national level was not welfare reform, it was cutting welfare. We need welfare reform to the extent that it doesn't punish welfare recipients for going to work. And if we don't take away daycare, and we don't take away health care, and we don't proportionately cut the amount of benefits that welfare recipients receive when they go to work, then I think you will find many more welfare recipients leaving welfare rolls. And that's true welfare reform. So I think my idea is a radical one, but it's something that I plan to really advocate for at the state level, because I think people have lost sight of what the purpose of welfare was in the first place, Howard.
And now Michael Cavallo, if you'll answer the question.
I think welfare is one of those issues where it's very easy to make cheap points against the people that pass legislation regardless what it is. The welfare system was in a situation where it needed to be reformed, but any reform that you take is going to either be regarded as not going far enough or going way too far. Because on the one hand, if you make radical changes in welfare, you are going to be pushing people off the rolls who need to be there and have no other means of support. If you left the status quo or moved very little, you certainly did have people abusing the system. And I think that has to be taken into account. In terms of what to do with the people that come off welfare and the jobs aren't waiting for them, I agree that with Anthony that things like daycare becomes very important so that you can go out and actually pound the pavement looking for a job. Education programs become very important because it's hard to get a job unless you've got the skills to get the job. And so I believe that you have to spend actually more money trying to reintegrate people into the economy because that's really the only long-term solution. It's not keeping the status quo the way we had it. It's having a viable situation where people who want to work really can find those jobs and really are qualified to serve in those jobs.
Thank you. And now Alice Wolf.
Well, it's been clear that there needed to be some changes in welfare. But what has happened at the federal level is not the kind of change that we really need. And now that the state will be in a position to really work with people, I think that the key thing to remember is that people who have been getting assistance because they really need it. That in order to be able to go out to work, there are several fundamental needs that people have who have been on welfare, and those are education and training. Those are adequate child care and health care for a period of time until they can actually be paid at a level to support those efforts, and transportation to their jobs, and to make sure that that is really accessible. Now, none of that is going to work unless there really are jobs available for people to have. And, I talked to a woman the other day at Jefferson Park who has just gotten her first job in a long time because she'd been in an abuse situation and was just not able to work. And she is happy because she has a great food service job at Harvard University that's well paid.
Thank you. And now we'll go to our third question from Amy Miller. She'll direct it to Michael Cavallo, and he'll have 1.5 minutes to respond.
Good evening, Mr. Cavallo. Would you support campaign finance reform that limited or even eliminated private donations? And do you accept PAC money? Why or why not?
I have not taken any PAC money in my campaign, and I'll be interested to hear my opponent's answers to that as well. It's not that I feel that PAC money is the worst kind of money. I think that there are all sorts of ways to influence the political process by special interests, and PAC money is not necessarily the main part of the problem. There's bundling that can come through law firms or organizations. There's soft money. There's all sorts of ways to overly influence the political process through money. I think that public financing of campaigns would be a good step. I know that it's being considered in Maine. I personally don't feel that it would pass in Massachusetts. I'd be willing to support it, but I think that I'd push more of my efforts towards remedies that I think are more likely to be achieved in the near term because I think it's such an important area. So limitations on bundling, for example. And I think that would be something that could be passed now and would greatly influence the influence of very wealthy individuals on the political process.
Thank you. Alice Wolf?
Well, I think most people feel that much too much money is spent in campaigns, and they also feel that that money comes sometimes in large amounts in bigger races from special interests that then end up influencing public policy, and that is clearly very undesirable. I am in favor of public financing of campaigns. I am in favor, and as we are doing here tonight, of having free media so that people can get their points across and people can really know what the issues are. So I would support a referendum in Massachusetts if there were one, as there is in Maine, for public financing. With regard to accepting PAC money, I have accepted some very limited amount of PAC money from one or two unions. I think that is the system we have, and I would only accept it from sources where I felt it was in no way a conflict in my policies, and of course the amount is very limited. So I think that we do need a public financing mechanism, and I would support that.
Okay, thank you. Anthony Galluccio.
Thank you. And I think that some of the discussion involves a double-edged sword. I'm proud to say that this campaign I've raised $20,000 in contributions of $50 or less. And in fact, tonight I'll take the opportunity and inform the audience that I'll be having another VFW party Friday night, in which it'll be $10 to get at the door if you have it. But what people have to realize is if you truly want to get working candidates, and I still live at home and don't have a lot of resources myself, if you want to get working candidates involved, you have to allow them to collect private donations like the ones that I've just talked about, because the disadvantage would fall on those without resources. And wealthy candidates would then have a huge advantage over lower income candidates. At the same time, I do support the campaign finance reform that has occurred, which limits the amount people can give. I think people have to recognize that there are some good PACs. I've gotten PAC money from the nurses in Massachusetts, from firefighters, from other groups of working men and women who fought desperately to get health care benefits and livable wages for their employees and workers. Not all PACs are bad. And I think we as candidates have the responsibility to look at those who give us money. I returned a check this week for $500. And I think the media and the candidates have to do their work. And that will breed true reform.
Thank you. And now we'll go to a question from J.K. Deneen, and he will direct that to Alice Wolf, and she'll have a minute and a half to respond.
Hi. Earlier this summer, Massachusetts became the last state in the country to enact a sex offender registry bill. I'm interested in hearing your views on the new law. Will it work? And is there anything that you would do to change the law?
Well, the issues around the sex offender bill are very interesting. You know, there's probably nothing that really bothers people more than sex offenses, particularly against children. It's a really, really, really frightening issue. With regard to the registry of sex offenders, it seems to me that we do have to protect the community, number one, but we also have to recognize that in a certain respect it's a Band-Aid, because what the sex offender bill tells us is that we are allowing people back into the community who are a danger to the community. And so it seems to me that we need to rethink the prison terms. We need to rethink how we discharge sex offenders. And that is really the major thing that we can do with regard to trying to direct our attention to an incredible community hazard. I think that if we were to do that, then we would need to look at some of the other issues around what happens to people who are so, who are...
Thank you. And Anthony Galluccio.
Didn't get the word.
Thank you. I would support, and I would have supported the legislation that recently passed. I would submit that I would have attempted to amend the legislation. I think it should have been tied just to those who've committed sexual assaults and rapes. I think having lewd and lascivious behavior should not be part of the category. I think it will breed some paranoia. But at the same time, I think Our justice system needs to stand up for the innocent, and I think this is the perfect example of an issue where I will stand with the innocent. And this is a personal issue in some senses for me, because when I was on a swim team growing up, we had a coach who went to jail for sexually assaulting young people. And we have to recognize that that's there. And I think that while I would agree with my opponent that we wish the justice system didn't discharge people who are dangerous, we absolutely do. And I can guarantee you that I will be very tough on sentencing and keeping people in jail who are a threat to society. But this is a way for parents and people who have children to be able to just simply check to ensure their young people are safe. And I really don't think that that's too much to ask of those who have committed sexual offenses in this country.
Thank you. Michael Cavallo?
I think the United States has been awakening to the extent of sexual abuse in this country. To some extent, we've gotten over-aware of it, and we're not aware to the extent to which it occurs sometimes with friends and family and the people that that you really do have to watch out for, in some cases, the beloved coach. And it's not always sort of the stranger on the block that people are most afraid of that statistically is the most likely to commit abuse. Nevertheless, on those predators that do commit abuse and are strangers to the neighborhood, you do have to have a way of alerting people if they've been released from prison too early. And I agree with Alice that many of them are released too early. There is quite a high recidivism rate among abusers, much higher than in many other crime categories. And so this is one, longer sentences for the most serious types of abuse would be one way to handle the problem. And secondarily, what we are doing, this registry to at least let people know when they're entering the community is another. Now, I think that Anthony had a good point when he said that lewd and lascivious behavior may be something that is inappropriate to include in something that can be so stigmatizing and could result in people that have had just made a minor mistake getting losing their jobs and being chased out of a neighborhood. And so I would agree with his amendment on that.
Thank you. And now we'll go to the second round. Steve Marks will ask a question directed to Anthony Galluccio, and you'll have 1.5 minutes to respond.
Recently, the last several years, around the country and in fact around the world, there's been a wave of deregulation and privatization. In your view, has that gone far enough? Does it need to continue? And as a state legislator, how would you seek to influence that?
Well, I feel very strongly, Steve, about privatization, and I see it sort of in a simple way as government pulling a backdoor move, I think, to try to undermine the health care benefits and the livable wages that labor unions have worked so hard for in this country to gain. The reason privatization is sometimes cheaper, often less effective, is because there are lower wages and less benefits, and I think it looks good and it looks like a quick fix for politicians. But Steve, I think what we need to really look at how this country has progressed with respect to our labor movement and how we want it to grow and not cut back on that. So as an elected official, I feel that it is not in good faith to look at privatization as a simple way to save money. And I don't think it's worked very well in a lot of areas in this state.
Thank you. And now Michael Cavallo.
I take a mixed view of privatization. I think in some cases it's been bad, and in some cases it's been good. There are some functions that are best performed by government. There are some functions that are best performed by the private sector. The way I divide it is that areas that tend to be in a monopoly situation or a situation in which you want the pricing to be subsidized, you're better off usually using government, things like mass transit. In terms of things in which competition is available and you could get multiple suppliers who could lower prices and benefit consumers, then I think sometimes privatization is a way to go. When you look at the way government prices things, when there's no competition, you get situations like what was reported in the paper today about state police working on the highways, some of them 23 hours a day, something that no company would ever allow in terms of safety. And I think that through government, in this particular case, the people on the job didn't have the technology or the skill or the concern to keep track of it. They'd look at, say, the 10 highest overtime people and just sort of scrawl somebody in the back of the envelope. But there was no real control on it. And that's something that you can change in occasional cases of privatization.
Thank you. Alice Wolf.
Well, you know, all of us want to make government more efficient. We want to be able to spread our dollars as far as we can go. And so some people have come up with the idea of privatization as doing that. I don't see it that way. I really see privatization as essentially an excuse to pay people less and give them less benefits for doing allegedly the same job. And so one of the things that I think that we should be doing if we're going to look at this at all is to actually evaluate what happens with the programs. Because in many areas, such as in mental health areas and other human services, what's really happening is that people are being paid less and people are getting less services. I'm happy to report that privatization around the country has had one very positive effect, and that is that there are growing living wage campaigns all over the country stimulated by the communities, by unions, by the religious community, by activists to increase minimum wage to comparable wages and living wages. And privatization's done that because that people now know that if we pay comparable wages in the private sector, privatization will no longer happen in the same way.
Thank you. And now we'll have a question from Howard Manley directed to Michael Cavallo, and you'll have a minute and a half to respond.
Mr. Cavallo, the issue of race has been one of the unspoken realities in this campaign. How have each of you campaigned in the minority communities of Cambridge? And as state legislator, how would you balance the needs of minority residents with the needs of majority residents?
Okay. I've been campaigning in all parts of Cambridge, and I think I found it the most enjoyable to campaign in the minority areas just in terms of the human interactions that I've had with people. I've just met some terrific people in some of the minority neighborhoods. In terms of the job, and this is an area, civil rights areas is something that I've been very involved in through my foundation. One of the people that my foundation has helped was a guy who infiltrated the Ku Klux Klan in the 1940s when he was really taking his life into his own hands doing that. And by giving information over to the police about murders that the Klan was planning, he got found out by the Klan and they burned down his house in retaliation. So that's one area that my foundation has helped out in. We also helped out a Republican committee woman who was campaigning against David Duke in Louisiana and received death threats as a result. We also helped out a security guard at a Veterans Administration hospital whose boss was beating up blacks that were brought into the security office. And for opposing the beatings, he lost his job. So I think I bring the same kind of concern to the state legislature, and it would just, there are just too many different issues in terms of supporting the principle of education reform in which the poorer school districts are receiving disproportionately more state aid. I think that's been a very positive development, and I'd work on projects like that.
Thank you. And now Alice Wolf.
You know, in our community, as around the country, race is perhaps the most volatile issue that we deal with. It is an issue that I feel passionately about in terms of concerns for justice and equity and working with all members of the community. That has been my history in this city for 25 years. As I have campaigned around through the city, and I've been campaigning door to door, and I've met recently with a group of the African American clergy to develop an agenda for the State House in terms of the concerns of the African American community. What I have heard is many different concerns of needs around schooling, around just as for other people, health care, and for justice. In this race, an issue that's been very painful to me has come up, and that's been the issue around the Commonwealth Day School and a letter that I wrote to the Board of Zoning Appeal. And I want to say right here, with regard to that matter, that I did not oppose the siting of the school. The letter, which did speak about a particular zoning matter, was sent early in this. I was never opposed to it. And when I go to the state legislature, I expect to develop an agenda for justice for all of the people in our community.
Thank you. And now Anthony Galluccio.
Thank you. I've heard that question posed by the media in this race. And are you going after the black vote? How will you do in the black community? And someone said to me at the beginning of this race, Anthony, it appears you're doing very well in the black community. And I said, that's my community. That's my neighborhood. And I grew up in a neighborhood that was a mixed neighborhood. I went through the public schools and played sports and served on student government with blacks and Hispanics. I grew up that way. My friends were black and Hispanic. I think if there's one place in this country we can say that's true, it's here in Cambridge. And so I think that we should not play into that rhetoric on how will the black vote go in this race. Each black voter is an individual. I think blacks and Hispanics who are working class, who tie themselves to working class issues such as health care and housing and jobs and schools that expect a lot from their students, will look to a candidate that is in touch with those issues. And I have felt from the beginning I'm that candidate in this race. But I think that there has never been a bigger issue for me in politics than to bring people together. It's what I'm most proud of about this city. It's what I'm most proud of how I've grown up. And I think that the media should stop asking the question, and I think that black voters will go in and vote on issues that are important to them, and that's how they will decide.
And now, Amy Miller, you can direct a question to Alice Wolf, and you'll have a minute and a half to respond.
Do you support affirmative action laws at the national level, and would you support continued state incentives for minority-owned businesses?
I support affirmative action programs at the national level. I support them at the state level, and I support them at the city level. And in fact, when I was mayor, I was very involved with strengthening the affirmative action plan of the city to assure that people of color and women would be represented at all levels of government. Now, whether it's exactly worked out that way and implementation may be a matter of a question. But I believe that we still need affirmative action because, in fact, in all of our levels of government and in all of our cities, inequity still exists and unfairness still exists. And the inability to get jobs or the unfairness in getting jobs and in getting education still exists. Now, there is a downside sometimes when people feel that there's reverse discrimination. And yes, we have to look at those issues. And we have to be willing to discuss them in the community and to discuss it fairly and honestly and openly. And to come to the conclusion that the most important thing in our society is that we all have equal access and equal options.
Thank you. Anthony Galluccio?
Thank you. My hope, and I think it's everyone's hope, that someday that there won't be a need for affirmative action. I have not come to the conclusion that that day is here now. I have supported affirmative action. I will continue to do so. I'm very proud that this year the NAACP requested that I bring their list of concerns to the City Council on their behalf, which I did, which involved even in a city like Cambridge, which is a progressive city in many ways, there was still a lack of policymakers at the Community and Development Department and at our Human Services Department, and I was proud to bring that forward. And I think that because I do pride myself in representing working people, I'm exactly the type of candidate that has to bring people together, and that's why those issues are important to me. And so often in this country right now, working people are pitted against each other over civil service jobs, over health care, over housing. And if we don't address that and deal with that, the frustrations won't be dealt with. but we cannot have generations of people blaming other people for their frustrations, although well-founded, should not be pitted on other people. And people have to recognize that blacks in this country still did not have equal rights to vote in 1965. And that certainly wasn't a long time ago. So we have to recognize why affirmative action is there. And I think I will continue to support it till I feel comfortable that it is no longer necessary.
Thank you. Michael Cavallo.
There's still a role for affirmative action because there's still prejudice in our society. I have personal experience with prejudice in employment because I used crutches, and back when I was in high school, I'd apply for a job and be turned down for it quite strictly because I had crutches. And even though I could do the job, the person looking at me would look at me and say, no, you can't do it, without giving me an opportunity. So I know exactly what that feels like. And even though people today would not be so blunt and tell you that was the reason, you know, I'm turning you down because you're black, or I'm turning you down because you're a woman, that can still be the unspoken reason. And that's why affirmative action still has this important role. Now, where I think it could be more focused is that while we've made a lot of progress on entry-level positions and mid-level positions, there's really a glass ceiling still. And I think we have to pay more attention to things like the minority business programs and exactly how the executive group of a business looks in terms of, are there minorities and women at the top above that glass ceiling and not just in the middle ranks.
Thank you. And now we'll go to a question from J.K. Dineen, directed to Anthony Galluccio, and you'll have a minute and a half to respond.
Councilor Galluccio, it's likely that the D Street Convention Center project will be voted on in the next 2 years. Do you support the project? Would it benefit Cambridge? And should Cambridge hotels and restaurants be expected to help pay for the project through a tax?
Well, first, I will not speak to the issues of the geographics of it. I think a convention center in Boston will be of benefit to the surrounding communities and of Boston. I have prided myself at the city council level of being someone who is fiscally responsible. I think that, especially with respect to public financing, taxpayer financing, it will be very difficult for me to support public financing. I think that the hotels tax is a potential. I don't think Cambridge hotels are going to benefit to the extent that Boston will. I would really have to take a look at what the assessment is for how Cambridge businesses would benefit, and I'd like to talk to the business community and see if they'd be willing to do that. But I will say that it's the business community who I think should step forward and pay for these private enterprises and not public taxpayers. So I'd have to look further into the benefits for Cambridge, J.K.
Okay, thank you. And Michael Cavallo, your answer?
I think in general, convention center would greatly benefit Boston in competition with these other cities that are able to bring in all this convention business. I think there'd be a great deal of spillover business that would benefit the whole metropolitan area. So I'd be for some portion of public financing, plus more having the business community paying for it, particularly the types of businesses that would most benefit by having it here. But I think to be a major city, and Boston sort of has the historical and cultural and other resources that do make it a good site for conventions and organizations to come here, that we really would be doing ourselves a favor to make the facilities available.
Thank you. And Alice Wolf, your response.
Well, with regard to convention centers, I'd like to broaden it out a little bit and say this. I think that the development of a convention center, and particularly with regard to whether there should be any public funding, really needs to be assessed on the basis of whether or not the public is actually going to benefit from this, and what those benefits are and who's going to benefit from it. I think we tend to, on many of these decisions, whether it's convention centers or tax breaks for Fidelity or Raytheon, to get a kind of tunnel vision, not have enough information about the whole impact, and then to make, often legislators and governors make decisions on some political basis because some constituencies have really push them in this direction. So we need to have information. We need to know what people who evaluate these kinds of projects say. And then we have to say, is this really more jobs? Is this really going to help the community? And so that's how I'd approach it. My gut feeling, and I'll give you my gut on this, is that I would probably support having a convention center, but I probably wouldn't support doing it with public money.
And since you've all been so wonderful about keeping to time, we actually have opportunity for a final question. Steve Marks will ask that question, and the first respondent will be Michael Cavallo. You'll have a minute to respond.
As you know, many people regard the train line in North Cambridge as quite dangerous to pedestrians. As you also know, I'm sure that's an MBTA line that's run by the state, essentially. As a legislator, what measures, if any, do you feel would be appropriate to create a safer crossing or other barriers for that train line?
I think the role of a state legislator should not be underestimated to intervene in situations of this kind, because even though you're only one vote in this large body, you develop a certain amount of clout with the agencies involved. And so they take your phone calls, and you can, what I think I would do, because I'm not an expert on transportation safety, is I would go to the people in the area and say, what measures would you propose? Then I go to the opponents of the measures and say, well, why do you oppose this? What's wrong with doing this? If you oppose it for this reason, how else can it be approached to get the same goal done? And I think that the legislator, if he's caring and has a certain amount of skill with people, can get in the middle of these situations and help resolve them favorably for everybody.
Thank you. Alice Wolf.
Assuming that what you're talking about is the railroad line that goes through
commuter
North
line,
Cambridge
yes.
near Alewife, this is a very, very important project because over the years, numbers of people, including several children, have been killed on those railroad tracks. Now, I'm glad to say that we've made a lot of progress on this project, and in fact, there has been state money that has been allocated. I think it's state, it could be federal money. There's state or federal money that's been allocated to create 3 or 4 overpasses over those railroad tracks. Right now, the Community Development Department, as I understand it, is working to see that that money actually is appropriated and gets used to create these overpasses. And I hope if we sit here in 2 years, they will be completed.
Thank you. Anthony Galluccio.
Thank you, Steve. Actually, I can remember growing up, going over the tracks and never knowing that there was an under the tracks there because nobody used it. And it's a perfect example of government not working. Residents in Walden Square and residents who live on the other side of the tracks have been hearing government tell them that those repairs will be made for the last 10 and 15 years. When I was growing up, someone died on the tracks. Recently, someone died on the tracks. And I think that what we need to do and what I've done at the city council level is first instruct the city manager that we can't wait for the bond money. And what people don't realize about bond appropriations is that just because the money is in the bond bill doesn't mean the governor signs the money out of the bond bill. We have all kinds of money waiting for appropriation in bond bills that could help our community. One of my goals is going to be to go get that money. But we were starting on temporary repairs now, and I'd like to go to the legislature and make sure that money comes back to our district.
Now, you've been very good. I hope you can continue. Howard Manley can actually ask one more question. You'll have a minute to respond. We'll direct it to Alice Wolf and continue.
This is a very short question. Yes or no will do. As a state legislator, would you support legislation that would sanction gay and lesbian marriages?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. And I'll expand slightly on it. I think that a person's sexuality is very basic to his or her being, that currently people are not as protected if they can't have marriages in terms of child custody, in terms of insurance benefits, in terms of all the rights we take for granted. And I think it's time to change the situation for this persecuted minority group.
Anthony, you want to reclaim some of your time, I see.
Could I? Just to indicate, and I have supported domestic partnership at the council level, and I'm prepared to support it at the state level. for insurance purposes, I have not decided to support gay marriage at this time. I've listened to gay and lesbian supporters that I have. Some of them believe it's a top issue on their agenda, others do not. I'm not completely comfortable with it yet, although I'm compelled by some of the things, the arguments that I've heard. At this time, I wouldn't support it. At the City Council, I voted present on an order which had no legal bearing, as much of what we talk about at Cambridge City Council doesn't. But I did vote present because I think it's a volatile issue and we need to be cautious with how we discuss it. But the arguments for it are compelling, and I also understand the discomfort with it on the other side.
Thank you. And now we will conclude our forum with closing remarks from the candidates. We'll begin with Anthony Galluccio. You will have 2 minutes to speak, and continue now.
Thank you, Nina. During and throughout this campaign, my theme has never changed, and why I felt that I was the best candidate to represent this district. And I grew up in the city, as I had said in my opening. And I understand firsthand how important it is to have a government that serves its residents. And I think at a time in this country where people somehow believe that our solution is around less government, I believe more and more it's around having more compassionate government. And this district and the neighborhoods that I grew up in benefited from the leadership of Tip O'Neill and Speaker Flaherty. And I recognize that, and those who came to me and asked me to run for this position, I think believe that I can continue that. At the same time, I think that I can bring a fresh voice of leadership to this district. I truly believe that this race represents some of the problems that we're having within our Democratic Party, and I want voters to go in and elect a candidate that they believe can bring progressives and working men and women together within the Democratic Party. Because quite simply, if we cannot do that in a city like Cambridge, then we cannot be expected to combat what's happening at the federal level. And I believe more and more as this campaign goes on that I'm the candidate that can do that. And I would be proud to return to the State House to try to continue the Democratic tradition that started way back with Jack Kennedy and Tip O'Neill and Speaker Flaherty and those in between, to try to make sure that this district represents a leadership post for traditional Democratic leadership on Beacon Hill, and that's what I want to do, and I would be honored to do that.
Thank you. Michael Cavallo, your closing statement.
One thing that I bring to this race is a very practical orientation, where I'm more comfortable with what can get done as opposed to sort of stating measures in a way that sort of appeals a little bit to this side or a little bit to that side. I'm really interested in actually implementing proposals and not in fancy phrases. So a lot of my interests center around the environment. I was really happy to see the Rivers bill passed. I'd like to now go on to say extend the bottle bill. In cases like education, I'd like to defend the education reforms, but go on and adjust the formula so that communities that support their schools like Cambridge are not unjustly penalized. And I'm very interested in consumer protection. I'd like to keep the discounts that are available on automobile insurance, and you'd have to rewrite legislation probably to do that, because there are groups that are going to try to remove it if places like AAA don't meet their 35% guideline. And I'd like to rewrite the legislation to keep those discounts, and I'd like government to get involved in other kinds of consumer protection, including making sure stores charge the right prices that they've advertised, which they're just starting to look into. I'm very interested in issues around crime, particularly in terms of both saving money and protecting people more by keeping more violent offenders in for longer periods of time, but releasing nonviolent offenders to alternate programs instead of putting so many people in jail. And also in terms of crime, I'd like to penalize criminals that use minors in drug deals as lookouts and other criminal activities. Rather than tamper with the juvenile justice system, I think it can be done through the adult system to penalize the ones that are employing the minors, not the minors themselves. So there's a whole raft of issues that I'd really love to get started on. And if you were kind enough to elect me to the State House, I'll get started.
Thank you. And Alice Wolf, your closing statement.
Thank you. I want to start by as I did at the beginning, thanking everyone for participating, the press, the moderator, and for the people who sponsored this forum, because I think that perhaps what's most important in this election is that all of us work as a community, hear what we each have to say, and try, whatever happens on September 17th, to remain a community that works together. So I think forums of this sort are really very important. I came to this country many years ago as a young child, as an immigrant, and grew up here with my family, working very hard, living for them, in a sense, the American dream. For many people now in our district, in our city, to say nothing of our state, their hopes have been shattered in certain respects, or at least they're really worried that they will not have that kind of future. I ask you to send me to the State House in this important district, in this district that is used to very powerful leadership, because I have worked with you for 25 years, worked with you in the community on many important issues, and I believe that I can bring that knowledge and bring you, the community, to the State House to help all of us together to assure that our children, all of the children from all parts of our city, to live the American dream that my family saw me live.
Thank you all. On behalf of Continental Cablevision and the Cambridge Democratic City Committee, I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists and candidates for their participation this evening, and thank you, the audience, for joining us. These forums are co-sponsored by the Cambridge Democratic City Committee and Continental Cablevision, with space graciously provided by the Institute of Politics at Harvard University as a public service. This forum is part 1 of 2 and will be recablecast on Channel 3 at various times before the Democratic primary on September 17th. We've done our civic duty. Please do yours and vote. Thank you for watching. Please stay tuned for the next forum, scheduled to begin at 8 p.m. for the 28th Middlesex State Representatives Democratic Primary Forum. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, I'm Nina Arima. You did a wonderful job. Thank you, Michael. Nice to meet you, too. I think we'll come and help you with that in just a second. Yes, uh-huh.
So what are you doing when you're not doing this?
This. This is what I do. No, I work for Continental Cablevision. I work for WBC. I work for WILZ. And I work for anybody who's got a dollar.
Yeah, you're the only one that can shut me up. No, you get nervous. Good to see you. Talked on the phone a bunch of times. I wanted to unplug them here if we needed to. If they want to walk around, we'll just unplug them here. And then when they sit down again, we'll connect them. You can leave the mic on. Just put this in your pocket. And we'll plug you back in.
One minute to go.
Speaking of burger, I hope I have that toast somewhere. It wasn't that bad, but somehow I hope I can get it. It's a company car too, so I think that's banned from each other.
May I wake you up? All right, who's tired? Everybody go home. No. Yes, sir. I'm sorry?
Who goes first with opening remarks?
Who's going to go first? Ted. Yes. I'm sorry, what did you say, Chris? 40 seconds to go. $15. We're rolling the open. Welcome to the 28th Middlesex State Representative Primary Forum. I'm Nina Arima and your moderator for the evening. This is part 2 of 2 forums co-sponsored by the Cambridge Democratic City Committee and Continental Cablevision as a public service. We wish to thank the Institute of Politics here at Harvard University for providing the space. Regardless of which candidate you may prefer, please remember to vote. This evening's program consists of distinguished panelists from the local media and the candidates for state representative. The panelists are Steve Marks, Director of Television Production and Programming at Continental Cablevision in Cambridge, Howard Manley, Cambridge reporter for the Boston Globe, Amy Miller, Senior Writer for the Cambridge Chronicle, and J.K. Deneen, reporter for the Cambridge Tab. The format for this evening is round robin. We will begin with candidates' opening statements, then questions from the panelists, and finally closing statements from the candidates. The first candidate to speak will become the second candidate to answer questions in the next round, and then become the third candidate in the subsequent rounds, and so on until we are out of time. Time will be kept assiduously by our timekeeper, and a bell will ring when 10 seconds remain during an answer session, and then rung again when your time is up. I will have to interrupt if a candidate goes beyond time. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the candidates and their opening statements. We'll begin with Albert T. Darling. Albert?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
My name is Albert T. Darling. I am a candidate for state representative in the 28th Middlesex District. I am a lifelong candidate, a lifelong resident of the city of Cambridge, a graduate of public schools, and 20 years of service of the Superior Court. The reason why I am running for state representative is I want to be able to serve the people of the district well. The present incumbent is not serving the district well, and that has been proven, and we will prove it in the upcoming debate, hopefully. I have been involved with the community, such as the Cambridge Pop Warner, the Docklinsky Road Race, the Ringe Alumni Association, and the Cambridge Alumni Association. Also a member of the Lions Club and the Kiwanis Club in the city. I have served the city through the different organizations that I belong in. I have given something to the city, and I want to continue to give something to the city so I can bring it to the State House and work hard for the people of the district, for the 28th Middlesex District.
Thank you. Ralph Lopez?
Thank you, Nina. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I've lived in Cambridge for 15 years. I graduated with a degree in economics and political science from Yale University. I am pro-choice. I stand firm on the rights of gay men and lesbians. I fiercely oppose the death penalty. I want to tell you a little bit about what I want to accomplish if I am elected state representative. I'm committed to working to build a state economy in which jobs are created through the expansion of the mass transit infrastructure, through the construction of bicycle paths, through recycling, and through other quote-unquote green industries. I oppose the move towards large-scale gambling as a solution to our economic problems. There are better ways to create jobs. I will also work to shift the focus in the criminal justice system in our state from the so-called war on drugs, which our governor seems so obsessed with, and onto the violent person-on-person crimes, especially as it relates to the appalling increase in the incidence of violence against women. What does this mean? This means prevention as much as anything else. We must shift massive resources toward programs at the prison, school, and community levels which counter the lack of respect for women and children prevalent now in our society. Finally, I will oppose the giveaway of millions and millions of our tax dollars to profitable corporations, because it is this money that should be spent on public needs, such as hiring teachers, AIDS research, community youth centers, affordable housing, the entire list of progressive priorities. And I hope we can get to these issues here tonight with the candidates and with the panel.
Thank you. Lori Tamor Berry.
Good evening. My name is Lori Tamor Berry, and I have been living in Cambridge now for about 23 years in Cambridgeport, where for the last 2 years I have been the Democratic Ward Chair. I work closely with the Democratic City Committee and became very active during the tax rollback fight in the early 90s. 15 years ago, I started working in state government. My goal was to do something about the perpetual cycle of poverty and despair in our inner cities. I worked closely with AFDC recipients and their children who were caught in tremendous turmoil and stress. We began to build some programs in the 80s, which were the boom years, and then when Weld became governor, one of the first tasks I had to perform was to terminate children who were in daycare slots whose moms had obtained low-wage jobs. I'm very concerned about the trend, our economic trend, in terms of trying to reduce the disparity in income. We all are living, so many of us, with economic insecurity, and I do not see our elected Democratic leaders making a concerted effort to try to get together with other parts of the private sector, with academia, with labor, with the unemployed, to come up with viable solutions for jobs for now, for the future, and for our children's future. Thank you.
Thank you. David Hoyka.
Hi, I'm David Hoyka. If you're watching this tonight, you've probably gotten a letter from me with a questionnaire, and I'm really thankful to say that a lot of you have responded to my questionnaire. That shows what I'm looking for running for state rep here. I want to be inclusive. I tried to reach out to everyone in Cambridge, whether whatever your race is, whether you're elder, whether you're a younger person, whether you have disabilities, whether you're unemployed or not. The problem I see with the race right now is that too many people are looking for too many factional interests and too many special interest groups. I've tried to reach out to everyone. I'm concerned about elder care issues, affordable housing, health care that people can depend upon, economic development and jobs, education, and the environment. Now, I've lived in Cambridge for 25 years. I went to the local technical school, MIT. I've been married 8 years to my wife, Ina, and I own my own home with her. I'd really appreciate your vote for me, and I'd like to work with you to advance all of our interests in Cambridge at the state representative level. Thank you.
Thank you. And the Honorable Alvin E. Thompson.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here tonight. I'm an incumbent representative of the 28th District. I'm proud to have served in this capacity over the last 8 years. I think I have a record to go by. If you look around in our district on housing and elderly affairs, if you look in the paper the last few weeks, we have saved the 808 development from being turned over back to management. It's now being owned by the tenants. Austin Court got a big shot in the arm from EEOCD, which enabled them to build that unit also. And down in Hampshire Street, we have a program down there dealing with the juveniles from the courthouse who have problems. Intervention program, which we funded, which I helped fund. Instead of having these young men go on to some correctional institute, we have 28 young men and women today working down there. And if you go by there any day of the week, you see them happy and enjoying what we have to do. Also, in Cambridge, we, as local representatives of the area, I'll be the senior member of the staff coming in the first of the year taking Charlie Fleury's position, not as Speaker of the House, but the senior member as far as getting things done for the city of Cambridge. I feel very proud and honored to be able to do that. Also, our cherry sheet returns. Cambridge has had the highest cherry sheet return in the last 8 years we've ever had in the past. 707 funds, the Chapter 76 funds. These are all things we do as far as the district and the local government we try to do. Also, on crime prevention. Yes, I did not vote for the juvenile bill because I know that all of us sitting here today with young men and women in the street never know what our sons and daughters are doing from day to day. If they're juveniles, they've had a crime, let the court decide. It's not the legislator's job to decide how a young man is to be tried back and forth. If we're going to join a big political game to make somebody elected to Attorney General and Governor, that's the way they voted. I voted against it. Because I had in my family a few years ago a young man who was murdered. I didn't want to see the young man go to jail for life or go to electric chair. It's a rehab type of situation. So that's why I consider myself to vote on that particular bill, which my opponent is not going for today. Thank you.
And now we'll go to the questions. Steve Marks will ask the first question directed to Ralph Lopez. You'll have 1.5 minutes to respond.
As a state representative, what measures would you use and how would you use them to either to enhance development or to limit it or to direct it in certain directions? And I'd like it if you could take specific reference to developments in the Central Square area now. I'm thinking of Forest City, food store, those kinds of issues.
I think that, first of all, development must always be in the service of the neighborhood rather than the other way around. And so I've always been active in this area. We need to make sure that neighborhoods are not run over by overdevelopment. Forest City is a fact. My ward committee has been active in making sure that there is a food store there. And in general, my philosophy toward development is, yes, it's important to the tax base of the city, but it is the nature of the community and the people in the community which makes Cambridge attractive to business. It's not the fact of business being in Cambridge that makes it attractive to residents. And so I am very careful of development issues. I actually spoke out against the raising of the worst house in Harvard Square, the raising of the Grendels and the Tweeters building, and against the proposed erection of a huge monolith at the address 1008 to 1010 Mass Ave, which would basically turn that part of Mass Ave into an area more on the scale of Kendall Square. It's a 90-foot building. It doesn't belong in that part of Cambridge, as many 90-foot buildings do not belong in most parts of Cambridge.
Thank you. Lori Tamor Berry, the same question.
One of the major developments now that is being undertaken is the old Elbury Ford site on the corner of River Street and Putnam Avenue. As the Democratic Ward Chair in this neighborhood, I have reached out to the developer, Mr. Kennedy, many times over the last few months to be sure that there will be some kind of affordable food store in that site once the OSCO drug has gone up in the fall, which is what they're digging for right now. My concern is that there may not be an affordable food store, and we need one desperately in this neighborhood. Trader Joe's, which just opened up a few months ago, is a store that really does provide more gourmet kinds of taste for the community, but for families on low income, seniors on vouchers, and they take no newspaper clippings nor food stamps, does not really meet the needs of the community. So we as a ward through the community will stay on top of this and hope to be able to bring some pressure to bear on the City Council that there is an affordable food store at this site.
Thank you. David Hoyka.
I've worked providing jobs and job training over the last 15 years. I also work as a lawyer advising businesses on how to create jobs and how to wend their way through all the myriads of regulations that make it very, very difficult for any business to expand in Massachusetts. We have an internationalized economy that brings us competition from all over the world and takes the service jobs that we used to have here in Massachusetts and the manufacturing jobs and whisks them to the other side of the globe. The problems with Massachusetts and the legislature and the laws is that our legal structure and our regulation structure hasn't kept up with the business realities. We have regulations that are a century old restricting businesses from producing jobs in Massachusetts. Some of these regulations go back to feudal ages. I believe it's very important to streamline these business regulations, to provide business incubators if you have a business idea, to help you start a small business that you want to start, to produce an infrastructure. It takes 18 months sometimes to get a digital telephone line in Central Square. I know, I've tried it. We need tax credits. We need amnesty days for businesses. If you try to start a small business and hire an employee, the first notice you get is a tax notice. We have to fix these problems so we can hire more people and improve our situation.
Thank you. Alvin Thompson?
Yes, we go back to the Stop and Shop. I'm sorry we didn't continue to keep the Stop and Shop in the area, but I think the biggest, most important thing right now to attract business in the Cambridge port or any part of Cambridge is last month, the Urban Ring. We funded that for a $50,000 study, and I think last week we were notified of a lobbying effort we did to get $2 million into the area as far as transportation of people and businesses in that area. No business is going to relocate into Cambridge Port from the areas of Brookmine Street all the way to Kendall Square and over because there's no direct bus service in that area. So therefore we have to start providing some kind of bus service, especially with the parking situation as bad as it is right now in that area. So therefore, I feel proud to be starting the trend to help the economic development in that area, to bring in more businesses into Cambridge Port through the Urban Ring Network, which has already been funded for the first study. And I think next Tuesday or the following Tuesday at the MBTA Board of Directors, we'll be voting us $2 million more to complete the study. The study should be over another 2 years, and that way we can start looking around for business to come in that area as far as the transportation cars it needs. I feel very proud to have done that.
Thank you. Albert Darling?
I feel it's unfortunate that the Stop and Shop did move out, and there should be a grocery store in that area, along with some great businesses moving in, would create a lot of jobs for the people of the district, well-paying jobs. And I would, if I was elected, I would sit down with some of these companies to have them move into the city and to hire Cambridge residents in with well-paying jobs.
Thank you. And now we'll move to the second question. Howard Manley will ask Lori Tamor Berry the first question, and you'll have 1.5 minutes to respond.
What are your views on charter schools in Cambridge, and do you believe them to be an effective alternative to public schools?
I do not believe that they're an effective alternative to public schools, but I do believe that we need to look at the way the charter schools are funded. I think that's where we're running into a lot of problems in Cambridge, because at the end of the school year, this past year, many programs were cut in local schools and many teachers were laid off. And a lot of neighborhood residents blamed the charter schools for this unfortunate happenings and losing teachers and programs. So that's what I see as a real problem right now. And until we can get this cleared up in terms of how the funding is going to come out of the Ed Reform Bill so that it doesn't take out of our local school systems, I cannot say that I think that charter schools are a good alternative at this time.
David Hoyka?
I've sent a mailing to every voter in this district on how important I feel education is, particularly public education, to everyone in this district. Education for everyone is like the tide. As the tide goes up, everybody is benefited. As we give more freer access to all kinds of education to the citizens of the Commonwealth, to everyone here, we benefit everyone. Charter schools, I think, are a great idea. There's a new charter school that just opened a few days ago in Cambridge. Primarily, it seems to have the effect of helping minority students and some students who are poorly prepared to bring them more into the mainstream of society, to help them get a better job and to help them get a better future. If they're not being served adequately in the main school system, I definitely support programs that are going to help people get a better start in life. Thank you.
Thank you. Alvin Thompson?
First, we'll start off with, I voted against the education reform package, and I'm proud to say I've done that. Based on these reasons: the charter schools, tenure, the power of the superintendent, the loss of power of the school committee. We find out across the state now, since this reform package has been there, there's a lot of money going to cities and towns to upgrade the system. But speaking like Cambridge has the $10,000 per, another state city has $3,000 and $5,000. We're bringing them up the foundation grant. But I would beg your pardon to say that the charter school in Cambridge would open up on Thursday is not only for minority students, but for any student in the city of Cambridge who wants to apply. I serve in that board as an ex-official. We made sure we have a good balance starting there on Thursday morning. But also, I'll go one step further. It was not the charter school coming to Cambridge this coming Thursday that caused the budget of the school department to layoffs. The city manager did give the school department enough money to continue the education the way it was this year. But the school committee themselves chose to cut the budget. Now, part of the coalition which I joined for the charter schools, everybody was saying that the charter schools would take away the funds of the local community. The reimbursement to the cities and towns who have charter schools is 50% reimbursement back to the cities and towns. So therefore, it's only costing the city of Cambridge probably $1.5 million instead of probably $2.8 or $3 million. So I feel very proud to be part of that because people are saying that the charter schools will destroy our system. I'll go one step further. If we don't start doing the right thing in education across this state, charter schools will prevail and give our city schools a problem.
Thank you. Ted Darling?
On charter schools, if the charter schools are working well, I believe that it would be a great idea to expand and have more. But if they're not working well at all, they should probably be put right out of business. There should be hopefully no extra tax burden on the taxpayer.
Okay. Thank you. Ralph Lopez?
I have no problem with charter schools as they stand, as long as the main focus is on remembering that the idea is to bring all the public schools in the entire public school system up to excellence, because public schools are traditionally the avenue to opportunity in this country. How do you do that? Number one, you hire teachers, you bring classroom size down to an ideal maximum, I think, of 16 pupils per class, because you cannot teach anybody anything when there are 25 or 30 kids in a classroom. Now, this inevitably runs into a problem of money, and it's funny that that issue has come up. Anytime we go back to the liberal, conservative, Republican, Democratic debate, our side wants to hire more teachers. Republicans say, oh no, not if you raise taxes. We don't have to raise taxes. The money is there. If we would stop giving it to Fidelity and Raytheon, as Representative Thompson voted to do, in the case of Raytheon, $50 million per year, we would have the money to hire the teachers.
Thank you. Amy Miller, you now have an opportunity to ask a question and direct it to David Hoyka. You have 1.5 minutes to respond.
Good evening. Would you support campaign finance reform that either limited or eliminated private donations? And do you accept PAC money? Why or why not?
Yes, I definitely think campaign finance reform is important. We need a new method to finance campaigns in Cambridge and in the country as a whole. Let's take a look at this race right here. We have 4 different challengers and 1 incumbent. How can any one person get the kind of name recognition or reach the voters without campaign finance reform? This forum here, which was graciously put on by the Kennedy School and Continental Cablevision, is an excellent example of the direction we should be going, because it helps everybody have an opportunity to speak their mind and tell the voters what they feel about various issues. Now, my platform has been to include all Cambridge residents and not just special interests. Therefore, I haven't accepted any PAC money from any parties. I'm open to everybody and not any special interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Alvin Thompson.
Yes, last year we did legislate a campaign reform bill, which limited the amount of monies from PACs, limited the amount of money from individual contributions. I would say today that since that bill has been filed and been in effect, the PAC funds and the local contributions have sort of dried up. Everybody today is sort of afraid to contribute to campaigns. It's just like if you come to my office tomorrow morning, I cannot take you to lunch anymore or dinner. I have to pay for my own dinner, or else you take my money to pay for your dinner. I mean, the whole thing is just sort of ridiculous, but that's what the law is. So therefore, even as far as trying to negotiate or talk to lobbyists or talk to private people in business, you cannot do it anymore over a cup of coffee, because you must have a receipt, you must sign it, you must also say where the money is coming from, so therefore we stop doing that. Now what we do now is come into your office, we have a glass of water or some juice, no charge. We get the work done that way. But campaign finance and reform was taking place last year in the last session. Senator Tolman was the leader of that bill. A lot of people didn't want to vote for it, but we had to vote for it based on the pressure of other citizens.
Thank you. Ted Darling?
I have not accepted any PAC money in this campaign or in any campaign that I plan on running in the future. I don't believe in it, but I urge all the candidates that are running for the seat not to accept any PAC money, and it's something I just don't believe in, and I want the people of my district to be my lobbyists.
Thank you. Ralph Lopez?
I haven't experienced the feeling of anybody offering me PAC money, so maybe if that had happened, I'd have a different view. But my campaigns have traditionally always been very meagerly financed campaigns. Not meagerly, but modestly financed campaigns that depend on volunteer labor of neighbors, of supporters, and I think that's the way it should be. I don't like the idea of money coming from outside the district. Now, as long as we're on the issue of campaign finance reform, I think one thing we really have to focus on is that you find all these proposals, and no matter what you do, you cut off money at one source, it's going to come in at another. It's like a big blob of Jell-O. If you squeeze it on one end, it starts ballooning at the other. Soft money, PAC money, individual bundled contributions. We're never going to get anywhere on this issue until we work for a reversal of Buckley v. Vallejo, the Supreme Court decision that equated money to free speech. And that's what we have to do. And we need to work with Common Cause, which is doing wonderful work in this area. As long as money is equated with free speech, we're never going to have a free political system, because money is not speech. Money is the equivalent of the bullhorn or the megaphone.
Thank you. Lori Taymor Berry?
Yes, I believe very strongly that we have a very great need for campaign finance reform. I have not as yet had the luxury of receiving any PAC money either, but I wouldn't take it. I think that it's very important that people can write small checks and feel that that can make a big difference. I think that what is prohibitive is that a lot of low-income people do not feel that they can enter the electoral process because of the amount of money they are told that it takes to run a political campaign. And if there's some way that people can begin to work honestly together in the legislature to really make those laws, then we can set some ceilings and maybe have an open plane, a level playing field where more people can participate in the process. And that's what's going to make it healthy.
Thank you. And now, J.K. Dineen, you have an opportunity to ask a question to Alvin Thompson. You have a minute and a half to respond.
Representative Thompson, when you leave this building tonight, there's a decent chance that somebody between here and your car or here in your house will ask you, some homeless person will ask you for a quarter or a dollar. What is your strategy for dealing with homeless people when you're walking in the city? And what have you done as a state rep to address the problem of homelessness and poverty?
First, I'd say that the few pennies that I have in the bank, I bank at the Bank of Boston and Harvard Square there. And there's the Free Press gentleman there every time I go by. I think sometimes I probably buy the same paper 3 or 4 or 5 times a week. But I would say this, that I was proud to say that the Salvation Army, who runs the homeless program, the shelter for homeless people plus the daycare, I was quite instrumental in increasing their budget last year to be able to take on more of these homeless type people around the city of Cambridge. I think, as I see right now, the growing need of the problem is even getting worse daily. And I intend to hope to be talking to the city manager and other people to find out some kind of other ways to do a homeless shelter here in Cambridge. Every day it's growing. So I said before is that I contribute a lot. We have another gentleman on the corner of Bay Street who's there every day with his cup. I feed him every day. I got another fellow who stands in Harvard Square wants to do work. I take care of him. So I would even say this, taking the subway to work, start at Park Street Station, climb the hill, front of the church, maybe 9 or 10 doorways. It's $3 or $4 or $5 a day. I would say this, I had a homeless lady who came in from outside the state with 3 children, lived in my office for almost 6 months. Every day was dinner, lunch, and supper. Finally, we got her on the welfare rolls. We got her over to Charlestown in a shelter. And from there, she moved into another community, but Do what you have to do.
Thank you. Ted Darling?
The homeless situation is not only a problem in Harvard Square, it's a problem in Central Square. And I occasionally go to both squares, either to do some shopping or to pick up the newspaper. And when I do have, and I usually do have quite a bit of spare change, and I always give it to a homeless person. But I think we would be better off if we took that homeless person somehow and taught him a job, or possibly even a couple of courses where he could learn about a job. I think the money would be spent more wisely and more efficiently, and I think it would be much better off.
Thank you. Ralph Lopez?
Well, the first thing I'd do is ask him if he'd like to volunteer for my campaign, and that's not meant to be an entirely facetious response, because I do believe that we are in this together. I think it's important for people to understand, especially at that level, why there is homelessness since 1982 when Ronald Reagan took office. The fact that manufacturing jobs have been shipped overseas, not by accident, but because they were deliberately shipped overseas in order to take advantage of our tax breaks that we offer corporations to ship manufacturing jobs overseas. Now, Ted, you brought up an interesting point as far as teaching that person a job. There are no jobs out there for a lot of these people. The problem is that our wealth and our skills have been going abroad, and so I guess I would focus really on raising political awareness. In addition to, sometimes I give money, and sometimes I buy a cup of coffee. I know you're not supposed to do it all the time, according to the people that work at the homeless shelters, because there's a big debate going on as to whether they wind up using that money to buy alcohol, further exacerbating their problems. I take it on a case-by-case basis, but I think it's a problem that we have to address in bigger, broader terms.
Thank you. Lori Tamor Berry?
When a homeless person approaches me on the street for some spare change, if I have it, I give it. I also try to spend a little time engaging the person in some dialogue and finding out a little bit about how they became homeless and if they have any resources or referrals of places where they can go. And if I can help, I do try. But as Ralph has said, it is a problem due to the fact that there are not enough jobs for people in our economy these days. And that is one of the main reasons why I want to be elected to the state legislature, because I want to work really hard to pursue this absolute phenomenon, this dizzying job loss phenomenon of the 90s, which this trend is not going away. It is getting worse. And I think that we need to sit down at the table, those people who can make those kinds of decisions and find cost-effective preventive solutions to homelessness and poverty and despair. Thank you.
Thank you. David Hoyka?
Well, the issue is homelessness and jobs, and that's a real tough one. And I don't have a perfect answer because I've worked for quite a number of years placing homeless people in job training programs and jobs. I've done that in Cambridge and in Roxbury and in Dorchester, and it's really tough to do. It's not just a homelessness and jobs issue, because it also involves health care. Many of the homeless people have been deinstitutionalized as a result of cutbacks in the social services budgets and the health care budgets. So not only do you need to give them a job, but maybe they need medication, or maybe they need some other kinds of things, or perhaps they're just not employable in their present state. They also need clothing. They often need food. And if they're going to apply for a job, they need an address or a telephone number where they can get the calls back from the employers. These are really big problems, and I can't tell you there's a perfect answer because I don't think there is one. We've talked earlier about how our best service jobs are fleeing overseas. We have no particular programs in the state that are available to the public for adult education and adult training. Almost everybody changes jobs every 5 years or less, and the homeless people, as well as everyone else, need job training. We have a lot of work to do, and I hope you'll elect me so I can work with you on these issues.
Thank you. And now we have time, because you've all kept to time quite well, for another round of questions. Steve Marks will ask the next question directed to Ted Darling. You have 1.5 minutes to respond.
Over the last several years, a number of major industries have been deregulated, and there seems to be increasing pressure to privatize many of the functions that up till now have been functions of government. Do you think that this trend has gone far enough? Has it gone too far? As a state representative, would you tend to increase this movement, or would you tend to restrict it?
I would not increase it, and I believe it actually has gone too far. It may seem like it saves a lot of money at the time, privatization, and it doesn't. It puts people out of work, and it's just, I think it's a scam. That's exactly what it is.
Thank you. Ralph Lopez?
Yes, that last question about homelessness is such a serious question. I want to finish up on that. David, you did say that there is no perfect solution, but there are solutions. And one of the things that I'm advocating, for example, the expansion of mass transit, building of high-speed rail, are skilled, low-skilled and semi-skilled construction jobs that homeless people without high levels of skill, that aren't computer programmers, can do. And the money is there to have these kinds of programs if we would stop raiding the public treasury to give tax breaks to Raytheon, Fidelity, the alcohol distributors in this state on a state level, and billions more on the federal level, which we here at the state level could take a lead on. And so we can create those kinds of jobs, and the money is there. We just have to stop giving these corporations so many tax breaks. To the question about privatization, privatization is a Republican word for patronage. Many functions properly belong in the public sphere. And for one example, prisons, there is a clear conflict of interest in privatizing something like prisons, because what is this going to do to public policy in terms of who you should throw in jail? Somebody who you catch with a half ounce of marijuana, you're going to want that if you're a contributor to a campaign who happens to contract in building prisons.
Thank you. Lori Taymor Berry?
My concerns with privatization have a lot to do with accountability, particularly in human services, which have been privatized tremendously over the last 5 years under the Weld administration. I can tell you I know, because 5 years ago my position was downsized and my job was privatized. And one of the agencies that it went to was the agency that mismanaged the Clarabelle Ventura case. And I knew that this agency did not want to take a protective contract, but was forced to do so in order to keep its supportive contracts. And those supportive contracts, they provided wonderful support for. Adult education and summer camps and those kinds of things, but not protective services. There's some services that just should not be privatized. Mental health services, prisons. These are places where the rights of those who are receiving those services have to be accountable to the state, to the Commonwealth. And if a private agency is taking this on, they cannot be accountable. They do not have the same sense of responsibility to their clients because they are ultimately accountable to the Commonwealth. And I just feel that this is very dangerous for vulnerable families and vulnerable citizens of the Commonwealth who rely on these services day in and day out.
Thank you. David Hoyka?
The issue is privatization. On the one hand, everybody wants to save money in government. On the other hand, the privatization is symptom of a broader problem we have in jobs in society as a whole today, because many full-time jobs with benefits are being terminated, as Lori Taymor Berry was experiencing, and they're being switched into part-time jobs with no benefits. Now, the legislative problem that we need to deal with here is that jobs that are less than 30 hours a week typically have no benefits. I work as an employment discrimination lawyer. I see people coming into my office daily who have no benefits and no rights in the marketplace. And these are state legislature issues that we have to change the laws to provide benefits and protections so that it's no longer expedient for businesses to fire hundreds of people in their workforce, as is in today's newspaper and last week's newspaper, and replace them with temporary employees or part-timers or contract workers who have no benefits, no pension, no health care, no nothing. We need to change those, and that's a state law, and that's what we have to work on.
Thank you. Alvin Thompson?
Yes, I just want to go back to this tax break from the Raytheon and Fidelity. Now, I'm hearing my distinguished candidates for the District 28 representative talking about jobs going overseas. Now, if all the other cities and towns and states, other states are giving tax breaks to these large industries to stay there. So we give a tax break to Raytheon to continue to be able to stay in the state of Massachusetts. Now, that same tax break, we didn't give it to them. They may have gone overseas and put more people on the street. Now, on the other side of this, when you got 54 families in your district who work for Raytheon, you multiply that by 4, maybe 250 to 300 people. Those people who got laid off from Raytheon took the early out. They knew what they were doing when they took the early out. A lot of people were downsized, but the people who wanted to stay was provision there for it. Although they made a little profit, yes. But other states were luring Raytheon to come to their states. So we gave them a break and they stayed here with us. So if you're going to have it one side or the other, you want them to go overseas, they're going to go overseas. There's nothing incentive to give them there. Now, privatization. I'm opposed to privatization. I see it happening on the MBTA. I see it happening on the Turnpike. And in the health issues of the state in the last 5 years with the mental institutions have been taken over by privatization, but nothing but disaster. I think in the next recession, we've got to sort of pull this power back from the executive level, because they're the ones who are enforcing privatization.
Thank you very much. We actually have time for another question, and we're going to give Howard Manley the opportunity to direct a question to Ralph Lopez. You'll have a minute to respond.
I'm a little torn here, but Massachusetts has one of the toughest welfare reform acts in the nation. What will you tell a welfare recipient as state legislator who's willing to work but unable to find a job?
I would tell them that they've been used as scapegoats by this entire idea that it's the 1% of the people on welfare in the country and in the state that are responsible for this country's problems. It is not that small number of people that are responsible for the country's problems. It's a subtly racist idea put forth by Republicans and shamefully now bought into by Bill Clinton with his signature of the last welfare reform bill. I would tell them that the real money in welfare is, as I have said, and I must take exception to Representative Thompson's saving Raytheon line, because Raytheon offered 4,000 employees a buyout after they got the tax break. A buyout always precludes layoffs, or rather presages layoffs, and that's exactly what's going to happen. No jobs were saved in this event.
Thank you.
$50 million of public money were given away.
Thank you. Lori Tamor Berry.
If an AFDC recipient came to me and was looking for work and could not find it, I would share with this person that it was not something that was of any fault of their own or their own inability, but as Ralph said, that the market is glutted now with people looking for work, looking for full-time work with benefits, with pensions, with health care, and they don't exist anymore. That doesn't mean that they can't exist. It means that we need to look to our priorities. And I think that the priorities have been, for the last 5 years, tremendously looking towards profits for major corporations, rather than to the needs of communities to find ways to rebuild and to retrain. And that this is what I'm working to do. I would bring this recipient with other groups and organizations like Welfare Rights that are trying to change these policies.
David Hoyka.
I think there are two aspects to this problem. First is the part about job training and education to create a workforce that can take jobs whose skills haven't been outdated or outmoded. The second is producing the jobs. Now, the state has a responsibility to improve our public education system to provide public education and free public education, or low cost at the university level, for people on welfare and other people, so that they can improve their job training skills to meet the needs of today's marketplace. Now, the state also has the obligation, and we're not talking an expensive obligation, to encourage building a good infrastructure here so that businesses will locate here instead of in South Dakota or in New Jersey or in some other state. You know, Massachusetts has just a tiny patchwork quilt of programs to encourage business to locate here.
Thank you. Alvin Thompson?
I think the big problem here is it was a newspaper trend across the country Let's do something with welfare reform. So therefore, a group of legislators in the State House got together, put together a welfare reform bill to get it out to the public saying, we're going to stop what's going on. So you got a problem in Lawrence or Lowell or Haverhill, one individual or a group of individuals who are raping the welfare system. This comes back down to the people in the legislature say, let's do some reform. So we've done reform. But what have we done? People have to go up a welfare 4 or 5 years down the road. If we don't train these individuals as far as in a new area, as far as supporting themselves, we haven't done anything. So therefore, we have to go to private industry after they're retrained to try to get them employed so to be able to pick up where they left off at. But right now, I think the national trend and the local trend is welfare reform. We haven't seen the results of the welfare reform yet, and I think it's going to be a disaster.
Thank you. Ted Darling?
The welfare should be reformed. Each case should be taken on as a one-on-one case. If the person deserves to be on welfare, the state has an obligation to take care of that person. If the person doesn't belong on welfare for some reason, they should be knocked off the rolls, and maybe some of the funds that we knock these people off the rolls can be helping out the people who are on welfare. But hopefully that would help solve part of the problem anyway.
Thank you. And now we will go to the closing statements. We will begin with Lori Tamor Berry. You have 2 minutes.
Okay. I am very concerned about the current trend of our economy. As I have said many times before, people are being downsized at the same time as those in poverty are being stigmatized. And now, within the last week or so, President Clinton has signed a welfare reform bill that has taken away the safety net. This is very, very frightening for those families who are caught up in this perpetual cycle of poverty. And now, as we have been made aware, even in this evening's discussion, there are no real jobs or opportunities for these families who have been told that they must go out and find work. I have been involved with low-income women and children as a social worker with the State Department of Social Services, where I began back in 1981. In 1991, my position, as I said, was downsized. So I have had not only first-hand observation, but direct experience with some of the problems that I believe, as a state legislature, I would be in a very, very effective position to redress and to redirect priorities so that everyone in this Commonwealth had a real shot at opportunity and success. Thank you.
Dr. David Hoyka, your closing statement.
I want to tell you about some neighbors of mine who are elders, and they have monthly incomes of about $500 a month. And I know quite a number of people in that position, and I'm sure you do too. For $500 a month, they have to pay their rent, their food, their electricity, their clothing. Maybe they can fit in a haircut, and you know, you wonder, what do they have to leave out? I deal with people like this in my office as a lawyer, and you know, I'm like the little Dutch boy putting my finger in the dike trying to stop the leaks. And I don't want to be the little Dutch boy anymore trying to stop the leaks. I want to help with some of the structural problems we have to change in the state legislature so we can provide prescription drug coverage for elders, so we can provide some job training programs for all the people who are even middle class and are at the risk that they're going to lose their job just in the next paycheck. Those are the kinds of things I want to work with. I hope you'll vote for me. My name is David Hoyka. Thank you very much.
Alvin Thompson.
Yes, my name is Alvin Thompson, incumbent representative. I think the biggest problem facing us right now is the next session coming in. It takes 81 votes to do anything. Come up with all kinds of proposals, file all your bills, get all the things you want to do. If you can't convince 81 people to go along with you, you haven't done anything at all. Walking the streets of Cambridge in the last few weeks or few months, the biggest problem facing us here in Cambridge right now is rent control apartments who will come December and January. The leases will be expired of the last group of people. There are horror stories out here. So what I've done in the last month or two, I spoke to the Speaker of the House, Mr. Fetterman, so I'm proud to say tonight I voted for him, to come up with some kind of a subsidy program by a means test to be shared by all local communities of Brookline, Boston, Springfield, who's had this rent control problem go out of existence a year or so ago. Because in this city right now, people are petrified what's going to happen in December and January. And to me, that's the most important thing in my next administration starting out, to try to resolve this issue by December, while we're still in session. Expiring use. Expiring use bill, the only bill, home rule petition, Boston, Brookline, and Cambridge, the only petition to come out of hearing, to be voted on by the legislator, to a third reading, also for an enactment, is Cambridge's bill. I heard some of my opponents saying that the home rule petition was buried in some committee. If they were paying attention to what goes on in the State House, the only home rule petition, Cambridge, expiring use. There are 2,500 units around the city of Cambridge that could be in trouble in the next 90 days. My challenge is, when after the primary is over, back in session, to get that bill passed to try to save the citizens of Cambridge who've been here for a long time. So therefore, it still takes 81 votes. And our biggest problem there is this. May I finish?
You got it. You got 9 seconds.
Okay. People who voted across this state against rent control, those are the same reps and legislators we have to go there and lobby to let them know that the expiring use bill is not a rent control bill for the city of Cambridge.
Thank you. Ted Darling?
On primary day, September 17th, I would appreciate your vote. I will be your full-time state representative. I'm the only candidate who has pledged to be a full-time state representative. I will work hard for the people of the district. I will have one-on-one meetings. I will hold town meetings throughout the district. I will visit the elderly centers, every month. I will be a hard-working state representative. And on September 17th, I would appreciate your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Ralph Lopez.
Thank you. The incumbent vote for Tom Finneran for Speaker of the House was disastrous for Cambridge and for progressives, resulting in the failure of the assault weapons ban and the gutting of important environmental regulations regarding groundwater pollution. Be that as it may, my friend Alvin Thompson is an honorable man, but not every honorable man is the right person for every job at every time. We live in a time when the American middle class is rapidly disappearing, when all of the country's problems are being blamed on the 1% of the people on welfare, when stranger upon stranger violence is at an all-time high, when children cannot play safely out of direct view of responsible parents or adults. I remember when I was a kid, my brother and I could ride across town, this is when we were 9 or 10, for the whole afternoon, catch tadpoles at the pond, whatever. Kids can't do that anymore. And I find it sad that we even have to mention that in a debate. We live in extraordinary times, but I have prepared myself to do my part, more than my part, as your state representative to meet this challenge. I have the background, I have the training, the determination to move my initiatives forward, jobs that are kind to the environment, violence prevention, tenants' rights, affirmative action. I will be a strong defender of the vulnerable in society, a fighter for the poor and the middle class. I will not be intimidated by the real estate industry. Please make me your state representative in 1996. I humbly ask you for your vote. My name is Ralph Lopez. Thank you.
Thank you all. On behalf of Continental Cablevision and the Cambridge Democratic City Committee, I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists for their participation this evening and thank you, the audience, for joining us. These forums are co-sponsored by the Cambridge Democratic City Committee and Continental Cablevision, with space graciously provided by the Institute of Politics at Harvard University as a public service. This forum is part 2 of 2 and will be recablecast on Channel 3 at various times before the Democratic primary on September 17th. We've done our civic duty. Please do yours and vote. Thank you for watching. Until next time, I'm Nina Arima. Thank you. Thank you, Ted.
You've got a great voice.
Thank you. Jacob, thank you very much. Yeah, you did a good job. Amy, thank you. Yeah.